McDanald.
Yes.
Welcome to Power and Witness, and you're the National President of the Archconfraternity of Christian Mothers, and you're here doing a show with Jim and Joy, and I was hoping you could tell us about the confraternity and this new revised manual, or Mother Love Manual, right, that you all have just come out with recently.
Yes, absolutely. So a confraternity has canonical status in the church, and so we're not just a group of mothers that pray for each other. We are given the special grace to participate in the prayers of the other members. And so in the confraternity, we have a daily prayer where we're all working to pray for our children and the children of other members and help us each to grow in holiness. And we've been granted special indulgences and graces by the Holy See to help us in our motherhood and to assist our children in becoming holy. And our major work is just the education of our children. I mean, really the beauty of this confraternity is that it's specifically for mothers, and the work that we're already doing in our faith life to raise our children as good Catholics. And one of the beautiful indulgences that we're offered is that whenever we perform an act that's in union with the mission of the confraternity, is that we receive special indulgences for that. So literally teaching our children their prayers or saying their prayers with them, we receive additional graces and indulgences for those things that we're already doing anyway.
And there's a certain ceremony to join the confraternity?
Yes, yes. So when a woman who wanted to become a member would start by just praying our daily prayer, which is on our website at christianmothers.org. And it's a very short prayer to Our Lady of Sorrows, who's our principal patroness. And then she would come and she would contact a local confraternity if she has one in her parish, or she can contact the national office through our website, and then we can put her in touch with somebody in her area. All confraternities have to be established by the local bishop, so there are over 3,000 in the United States confraternities, whether active or inactive. So once it's been established in a place, it remains forever. And so confraternities that don't have active membership at this point could just be re-established. They don't have to go through the whole process again. But once a woman finds that she either has one in her area, or if she doesn't, she can affiliate with the national office in Pittsburgh and be kind of an independent member. And she has a particular promise and consecration to Our Lady of Sorrows, and she's a member eligible to receive these graces for herself and her children. And
she doesn't have to be a mother, right? It could be a son.
That's true. That's very true, actually. She doesn't have to be. And actually, one of the things that I think would be beneficial to the church is really if we get young women who aren't mothers yet to begin learning about motherhood through this prayerful devotional life. And or it could be a woman who has never had children who's older, but I think any woman who wants to fully support the mission of what we're doing, so she wants to support the education of children in the Catholic faith, then she's also eligible to join the confraternity and receive the graces.
And why Our Lady of Sorrows?
The original confraternity was founded in Lille, France, just by women who, I think after the revolution, living in the wake of that, and saw the secular forces attacking their children. And many times would see the, kind of, in a sense, living the sorrows of a mother who sees her children suffering. And so these mothers got together to pray and offer their children to Our Lady of Sorrows and our Lord. And then it became a movement that went to Paris and then was taken to the Holy See, and they established this group of mothers as a confraternity. And then it was all established under the patronage of Our Lady of Sorrows, who I think is actually working right now in a special way. You know, I don't remember hearing all that much about her for many, many years, and all of a sudden she's kind of coming up again everywhere. So I think it's beautiful.
I know when I talk to mothers, I guess there's the great joy of motherhood and things, but I guess you need the support group and the help on the sorrowful side of it, right? Obviously. Yeah. And I'm just thinking too of Mary as co-redemptrix, as one suffering with Christ. That's it. Her mediation is maternal, and then her participation, being the Mother of God, begins there, I guess, and then also at Calvary, that's this intense participation with Christ that mothers, I think, experience particularly clearly. Yeah.
And in our faith as mothers, we're not in the secular mode of motherhood where we want everything to be joyful and happy all the time, right? Like, we know that the cross enters with Christ, right? He brings his cross wherever he comes in. And so to be united with him, to learn from Mary how to stand at the foot of the cross patiently and lovingly, and to know, I mean, I think it's very interesting that some of the sorrows of Mary also have the corresponding joy, like the presentation, right? Is the prophecy of Simeon is the sorrow, but it's also one of the joyful mysteries, right? Yeah. So that's motherhood, really. I mean, you have all these joys and sorrows in your motherhood. You have, you know, whether it's childbirth itself, which, you know, is painful and difficult, or, you know, pregnancy, which is a trial, but it's also a joy, and to learn from Our Lady, you know, how to experience those joys and sufferings patiently and gracefully and lovingly, and to offer those united with her sufferings.
Yeah. And it seems like it's a very interior life, an intensely interior life for the mother. And I know Father Joseph Tuscan was telling me about, like, the support aspect of the confraternity. Can you talk about that? How, you know, women get each other, so to speak, and can support one another, and it just seems like there's a great interior depth to the role of motherhood.
Yeah, and I think the confraternity's role is really to support that interior life. I mean, you know, you would, as a member, attend meetings when you can, but the meetings are really focused on prayer and growing in your faith and growing in your ability as a mother to face the joys and sufferings of motherhood gracefully, to know what you're supposed to be teaching your children. You know, it's just kind of challenging sometimes. Yeah. And so when you gather for a meeting, a lot of times it's going to start with either Mass or Holy Hour of Adoration. It's going to a lot of times involve confessions available. All the confraternities are supposed to have a director, a local director that's a priest, or maybe a deacon who's a delegate if the priest is very busy and can't directly govern or help the women, but so he'll lead the meetings and lead a conference, give you a talk on motherhood or whatever, and again, just really help enrich your devotional life. So the core of the confraternity is really rooted in prayer. It's not like a mom's group where you're going out to, you know, do all the other wonderful things that mothers do together. It's really focused on prayer and the devotional life. We have a prayer manual called Mother Love that is really designed to help give mothers, from the time maybe before they have children, even before they're married, all the way through the time of their widowhood or the time that they're preparing for death, can cover all those years and all the times of their children's youth to their children's middle age to their children's older age, and prayers for mothers in all these different states, and a lot of us know that that changes a lot over time, from the time you're having babies to the time that you're having grandbabies to...
I just had a mother tell me it gets harder. She said she'd rather have the early years running after them and caring for them than now trying to pray them back into the church. And so she's struggling with that.
There are prayers for that too.
And I tell this story that this was just before COVID, I think, maybe a year or something, but I was at this conference, the Marian conference up in Philadelphia, and I was given like a couple talks in it, and people had come, they knew me from EWTN. So after one of the talks, they line up, and it's like 300 people at this, and most of them were women. But I remember every single woman asked me to pray for somebody. And I talked to some of the men in the line. It was funny, some of the guys, I think 2 of them had stories of they were in the hospital laid up by some health problem, and that's where they discovered EWTN. So I was like, the guys, you got to break their legs, put them in a hospital bed, they'll eventually watch. But I remember I just was so struck by literally every woman asked me to pray for somebody else. And I thought, that is part of the feminine genius charism, that call to prayer, and especially, obviously, for their children. So that's a beautiful... Well, tell us about the Mother Love Manual a little bit more. What's in there?
Well, we just released a new edition. The Mother Love Manual has been around since the late 19th century, and it's had several editions that have come out in the last, 150 years, and it's been the foundational book it's kind of a prayer book for mothers. And the different editions have all had different virtues and different, shortcomings. And so this latest edition, that we tried to really restore a lot of the devotional material from the earlier books. So there are prayers here for the sacramental life of a mother, prayers that you can pray during Mass or in preparation for Mass or confession, or prayers for daily life, your morning prayers, your evening prayers, litanies, and teachings, all for the heart of a mother. Prayers for your children who've gone astray, prayers for your school-age children, prayers for your children who are about to make their first confession or first Holy Communion. I find that the prayers that we have inherited and kind of restored into this new version of the book really speak the words that are already in the mother's heart. So a lot of times, and I might just be not a very good prayer warrior, but I know that my child is struggling with something. So if I'm to come up with a prayer on my own, it's usually going to be like, Lord, help him.
Right.
What else do I say? I don't know what else to say. And so this prayer book, I think the beauty of it is that I go through these prayers and I'm like, yes, that's what I want you to do for my child. Yeah. These are the things that I need. And then sometimes you don't even know exactly what it is that you want for the child. Right. So they're very specific, but also very deep in what they're asking for yourself as a mother, for your husband, for your children. Mm-hmm. There's a beautiful section. I just have a friend whose father passed away a couple of days ago, and there's a beautiful section of devotions for the dying, for those who are praying with the person as they prepare to meet the Lord, or prayers that you might pray if you're not with them. Right. And then prayers for the holy souls. And I think that's one of the sections that I love, is that a lot of devotions for the holy souls and for the dying have kind of been removed or from prayer books. So I'm really grateful that we have those here. Litany for the dying, litany for the holy souls.
Well, that's what I noticed. Yeah, there's litanies in the back, and
litany for a Christian mother that I hadn't seen before anywhere else. So one of the fun things about this edition is that when we were researching, trying to gather all the best editions to use as a foundation for this, I came across one on Etsy that was in German from 1888.
Wow.
And Father Tuscan, as he does, he travels the country, and he met a woman who speaks German, who's fluent in German. And so she actually worked me through what was in that edition of the book. And you could see that there were certain devotions in there that weren't in any of the other volumes that we wanted to bring into this one. So it really, I think the confraternity seems to have come to America from Germany. And so to kind of get back to our roots in a sense, and get some of the prayers that they were praying 150 years ago in Germany, it was really beautiful.
And then there's sections of scripture, like helping to understand scripture and meditations. Or...
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted for this prayer book, again, that we really inherited from earlier editions, but we also wanted to make really valuable for mothers, was to kind of follow the rhythm of prayer that is suggested by some of the great spiritual writers. So there's, in a certain sense, it follows a lot of what the Introduction to Devout Life recommends for how to pray, and you'll see that a lot in the beginning section of the morning prayers and evening prayers. But we also took from the liturgy of the hours to see what the church is praying. And so one of the things as I was working through this book and trying to see kind of which content to restore into this new edition, I was also trying to, it takes a lot of time, prayer time. And so I would also try to be praying some of the hours of the Liturgy of the Hours. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be great if some of them were in here? Some of the prayers from the Liturgy of the Hours. So we have a lot of the canticles that the Liturgy of the Hours uses every day. And so that's part of the scriptural section. And then the rest of it is really either just psalms of praise that would be very suitable for a mother, or other passages that are very motherly in nature, or that have to do with raising children or whatever. And certainly they're not all in there. But of course, Proverbs 31 and, the John, I think it's chapter 16, where he's talking about, a woman is sorrowful when she's in labor, but when her child is born, her sorrow is gone for the joy of the child.
Do you have a particular favorite, relating to motherhood?
A favorite passage
from Scripture? Yeah,
I think that would be it. Was the sorrow, or another one kind of. I forget where it is. I want to say Sirach, but oh, that a guard were set over my mouth and a seal of prudence upon my lips, that it may keep me from falling, that my tongue may not destroy me. We all need to reel it in, as we are kind of prone to talk a lot.
Well, I was talking to Father Tuscan. He said he said it like with some awe about like the woman's ability to network with one another. And I guess the flip side is gossip and whatever. But so that's beautiful. And there's also a catechetical section too, right?
Mm-hmm. There's a list of the most important prayers that you should be teaching your children, and kind of instructions on how to teach a little child to pray, or and then just a tiny little catechism on covering the Beatitudes and the mental prayer and how to do that. The different very basic points of doctrine that all mothers should be passing on to their children. And
maybe you should say too that you studied law. You're a lawyer. Did you practice some?
I did until my first son was born, and so I had the blessing of studying under some of the great pro-life Catholic lawyers at Notre Dame. That's why I went to school there, was to serve in the pro-life movement, and that was my plan. Going to law school was to, study with some of these wonderful Catholic lawyers, and then there were many of them. And the law school is very, very devout, and then I didn't end up going into that at the end of my education. And then when I think I just, for me, I'm serving the pro-life movement here now with the confraternity and with raising my own children. I mean, I think is the best thing that any of us can do is really take that role seriously and build up the kingdom, and all the new evangelization and the call to holiness and all that stuff. Mothers, I think you can't get pulled out of your home too much. You have to really do your best to focus on that and see your role as a missionary among your own family. You can't neglect them, because then the other work that you might be doing could be wonderful, but if you haven't reached the little disciples that God has put in your life, then you've missed your calling.
Right. Yeah, with this recent Harrison Butker speech and stuff praising motherhood, I was like thinking, I mean, don't we all agree, like a parent would say, hey, my kids are more important than my job? It's like, I think across the board, even secular people would agree with that. What is the shock and awe of this statement, like talking about the greatness of the vocation of motherhood?
Well, I loved that. I was so grateful. I actually wanted to send him a copy of the book for his wife. I don't know where I would reach him. But anyway, just to say thank you, because I think that women are just deceived. Like, it's okay for them to play with dolls when they're like 3, but as soon as they hit kindergarten, they're going to start thinking about if they're going to be an astronaut or a politician or a teacher. And when you have your child, on like, what do I want to be when I grow up? The only answer that's not really okay is a mother, right? Almost all of these young girls are going to be mothers, but they're never allowed to really think about it until they're actually pregnant. And then when they think about when they're pregnant, they're supposed to actually, according to the world, think about whether they even want that baby. But they're not supposed to think about it until that point, right? So that's what I think is missing in the world. Like, almost none of them are going to be astronauts, honestly. Like, even if they're the best of the best, they're still not going to be an astronaut. But they're probably going to be a mother, So I think it's so important to reach these young ladies, girls, but also the young ladies in college, and not just wait until they actually are in motherhood. That's why I say in the beginning that I would love for young women to join the confraternity before they get to that point, so they are given the grace, and that they're starting to learn what it is to be a mother before they're in a crisis situation, or before they're in a challenging situation where they're like, I don't know if I can handle any more kids. Or, these things that the world seems to think is natural, but you have to learn. You can't just, anybody can bear children and feed them, right? But what is it to be a Christian mother? It's not the same as just putting them in the world and making sure that their natural needs are met. You have to go above and beyond. And frankly, I am so busy all the time with putting my children in that position of learning the faith and trying to find new ways of teaching them. And I don't actually have time for a career at this point. Other women might be better at managing their time, but also wasting time with your children. They need that. They need to have those down moments where it's not all about the agenda of what we have planned to do or planned to teach them. Like, just enjoying life, teaching them to wonder about nature and creation and God, and giving them moments to do that, giving them time to observe you in your home, in your life, in your relationships.
Yeah.
Is key.
I remember Peter Criff, he was talking about his book on love. I think he talks about this, that children just don't want some of your time; they want all of it.
Yeah.
And you remind me of my spiritual director in seminary. He would say, "Waste time with God."
Yeah.
In your prayer time and stuff. Meaning, don't be a bean counter and parse out miserly. Okay, we give this much time and say this prayer, and then look at the watch. But just to lavish this upon them. And I like that too, just the concept of, it's like this growth that's happening with the contact between the mother and the child, that it's not just from this time to this time, right? It grows in spurts and stuff, and there's intense moments, and
Yeah.
how do you can't just...
Well, some of their questions will arise in a very natural way of observation, or just having the moment to spare, to sit and think, right? You don't know what's processing in their minds as they're just playing or whatever, or how they're developing their sense of family life. And so you have to give them time for that to develop. You can't plan it out. You can't expect it to come just because we're going to pray the rosary after dinner every night. This is when they're going to get their Jesus. You have to have their experience of family life be a peaceful place. I mean, you want them when they're older to come back to, home is peaceful. Home is loving. This is what I want, and where I can go if I struggle with something.
And how would you describe the father's role in the family?
Essential. I can't tell you how many times I've just observed studies, or, I think we were talking earlier about how the mother can do so much, but there's her kind of constant presence is a little bit in the background. It's not as noticeable in a certain sense than father, but you see how father's role when he's in the home or when he's not in the home will be almost determinative of a children being able to keep their faith, or even maintain relationships or whatever, having a good relationship with the father. Also, I will say it, wives need to be obedient to their husbands, and I'm sorry that we've had, decades in the church where a lot of priests are afraid to preach on submission. And so I'm grateful that a lot of priests now are also able to preach on Ephesians 5, and that there are a lot of families who are able to live that. But we have to have order. You can't have, I can't think of any creature in the natural world that has two heads, that isn't a monster. And we're trying to create families that have two heads, the mom and the dad, and you can't have that. You have to have a head of the family. And in some cases, that's not possible because the husband hasn't lived up to his role for the mother or for the children. Then you become the head and you do what you need to do. But in most cases, and ideally when you're preparing for marriage, you choose a spouse that you can submit to and be obedient to, but you have to respect your husband in front of the children. You have to give them the sense of order, and give him, even if you don't necessarily agree with all the decisions that he makes, I think there's virtue. I mean, you learn that in religious life. There's virtue in obedience, even if you don't understand why, or you would have made a different decision. Well, if the authority were yours, you could have made a different decision. But God's given the authority to the husband as the head of the family, and that goes a long way to lead the children as well. And of course, his display of faith and his display of affection for the children, there's nothing to replace that. But as a mother, I mean, I can only control what I can control. I can't make my husband something else. I have a wonderful husband, actually, but I'm just saying in a family, we do what we can do. We can't force somebody else to be who he's supposed to be. But
this hit me. I probably read it somewhere too, but just with Saint Joseph and the Blessed Mother, the Immaculate Conception. The angels in Matthew's Gospel, the infancy narratives are, the angels appearing to him in a dream, saying, "Go to Egypt.
Yes.
Come back from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid of this." And
yes.
It's like you have the Blessed Mother, immaculately conceived, so close to the Lord, and yet God's directing the family through Joseph.
Correct. Yes.
And he plans out. He's got to use his Pope Benedict. I recently was reading something he wrote about Saint Joseph that he had to organize this trip. I mean, you're like, we call it like a refugee into Egypt and trying to provide for the family. You got this maniac king trying to kill the baby. I mean, that's stress, right?
Unbelievable.
That's not like...
And how he insulated Our Lady and our Lord from having to, certainly they suffered on that journey, but he took a lot of that suffering on himself.
Yeah.
We don't really even know if Our Lady was aware at the time of what was happening to those other children. I kind of like to think that he protected her from knowing exactly what was going on, because that would have been so hard for her as a mother, taking her son across the desert to flee and knowing that other children were suffering for him. So I don't know, obviously, but I find so much peace in that. I'm so grateful for my husband to have his kind of insulating presence and his. I know some people who kind of get wrapped up in politics or where's the world going, or getting worried about their children because of the state of things anywhere. And I kind of feel very much like, what, if my husband, he's not super into politics or anything, but if I need to know something, he'll let me know what we need to talk about. And I don't say that to be naive or silly. I'm just saying I don't have the life in me to worry about all these things that I can't control. I'm so grateful that I'm enough aware that I need to be, but I don't have to get bogged down in it. And that leaves me to be free to be more joyful and cheerful with my husband and my children, to make our home more of a sacred space and not one that's kind of infiltrated by news or worldly things. And we're not hermits, but we have our home is our kind of space of peace. Hope, I think.
I remember when I was a young boy one time, and we were outside working with my dad, and it was one of the gas crunches, I guess, of the 70s. This is probably like the late 70s or something. And I remember him talking about it, and I think he saw the worried look on my face, about running out of gas. And he said, well, that's for me to worry about, he told me. I remember my dad was very perceptive, but he wasn't always the one to be the most empathetic, towards my feelings, But I remember it always got my attention that, he was trying to make this effort to protect me from that. And of course, the headship of the husband, the leadership, it's prudent. And so he, the woman, the mother's sphere in the family has this incredibly important input. In fact, I always looked at it too. It's like oftentimes the woman saying, hey, these are our needs here. This is what, this child may be struggling with this, or we need that. Or so, he's obviously taking all that into account in decisions he makes. And I was reflecting once about, I graduated from high school late 80s, and the school was a good place, but I thought too, and I understand why in one sense you don't, but it was never put out there by authority figures about the greatness of motherhood. Like all the girls in my class get into that college, get that degree, and it was all about work, 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 work. And I remember this one girl got married like right out of high school, and it was like this buzz around some of my girl friends, and I remember I was like, I didn't think anything of it. I thought for me it wasn't what's wrong? Why is that a problem or an issue? And they weren't criticizing, but they were just kind of wondering.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the girls was like this devout Christian, and she wasn't like condemning her, but I just remember it created this stir, and I like thought, why is that a stir?
Well, it is a challenge in our world. We don't live in an agrarian society where it's safe to be able to go out and, marry someone that you're familiar with, that your families have been together for, generations or whatever. There is an element of prudence in that. People tend to marry at their educational level and to be able to support a family. Starting out right out of high school is very difficult. Now that's not someone's fault. It's not necessarily the way God designed it, and it's not what the church promotes as how to. What I mean is that a man should be able to make a wage that supports his family, and so.
And I think this girl was marrying an older guy.
So there's definitely prudence involved, and I don't mean to say that it's not important for a girl to go to college or learn a career. I feel very grateful and confident that if something were to happen to my husband, that I could help provide and whatever. But it is very strange though that we have this sense that. That's not what a girl should even want to do, or she should not even enter into that.
And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the theology of marriage, your experience. I know you're not a trained theologian, but maybe if you could talk about just from your experience, the holiness of marriage, the greatness of marriage, how you encounter God, where you feel His presence in marriage.
Well, I think in the last 22 years I've been married, it's really just starting to be more clear to me, the theology of marriage and why it's so important that we live marriage in a godly way, especially just the fact of marriage itself, the expression of the Holy Trinity that comes into being when a man and woman are united and a child is created. And, so many great thinkers have expressed this much better than I could, but I'm just starting to really have these moments in my prayer of, as I am trying to grow in my motherhood and trying to make it closer to Our Lady of Sorrows, in her motherhood, and trying to understand the value of marriage and family in God's plan for the world and in the expression of Himself. So a lot of that requires, meditating, really reading about marriage, reading about what motherhood ought to be, really deeply praying for not only for my children, but for my motherhood, not just for myself and what I want and what I'm, interested in or whatever, but just praying to be a holier mother and to be able to lay down my life and imitate Our Lady of Sorrows and that self-sacrifice that we're called to as mothers, and also the gift of submission to a husband that's holy and good and has my best interests at heart, and just seeing how the persons of the family do, in some sense, but a real sense, reflect the persons of the Holy Trinity. And you have, our Lord, who's always submissive to the will of His Father, but the Father's will is always good. It's always good. It doesn't mean that it doesn't involve sacrifice. Of course, our Lord made the ultimate sacrifice and laid down His life for us, and so maybe you will be called to something like that as a mother, but the submission is always good. If, of course, you have to account for the humanity of people. But yeah, I think so. There's such a depth to what marriage really is, and I think that's why it's so much under attack. I think the fruitfulness of marriage is under attack because the Holy Spirit among us is that love of the Father and the Son that is produced in a certain sense by their unity. And I think the devil hates that, and he doesn't want to see that in our children being recreated.
Yeah, and we spoke about it earlier too, that Ephesians 5 and like the mutual submission that happens, and then the call to I think it looks different, in the man and the woman. Like, I guess I see it like the man is called to, Ephesians 5:21, be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. That he is called to lay down himself for the family, his gifts for the family, and the woman does that as well. And for me, one thing I think we don't say enough today, and it's it sets people go crazy when they hear this, but I think the men have a natural calling, a natural gift for leadership and leading the family, the head of the family. And so he lays down that gift of service to the family. He exercises it, his authority in service. And so, but both are called to sacrifice. And then maybe let's talk about that element too, because when I look at marriage and family, there's intense relationship living together. It's very concrete. Sometimes religious priests, you get a different assignment, you're in a different situation. Sometimes you can maybe run away from problems or whatever. Marriage, family is like you are together, and there's that constant call of sacrifice, right? That you have to get along and work with one another and sacrifice for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. It's daily, and I think in my marriage, what helps a lot is just recognizing my role in that, and not having a test of like, well, I will do my part if he did his. Right. If I feel good about what he's done in sacrificing for me, then I'll make the sacrifice. Right. My image that I always have is, in this triangle with our Lord at the apex, and then my husband and I on each point at the ends of it. And the closer, if you're just kind of trying to look across at the other person, if you're kind of trying to look across the bar at your husband and be like, well, I'll climb toward God as soon as you do what you're supposed to do. You're both going to stay at that bottom level. Right. But if I'm striving toward the apex, if I refer all of what I'm doing, through Christ, then I'm getting closer to Christ. I'm drawing my husband up to be closer to Christ as well. And, even if I feel like I'm trying to move closer and I don't feel like, he's doing it in the same way. First of all, I don't know what God's doing in his life, and his expression of holiness is going to be very different than mine. But, I think we're both going to be growing, and we'll end up being closer together as well, because, and again, imagine that triangle. The closer you both are to the apex, the closer you are together as well.
Father Angelus loved that.
Oh,
the spokes on the wheel.
Okay.
As you grow closer to the center, which is Christ, you get closer to one another.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the same idea. So I try not to, kind of look at him as, well, what is he doing, and what do I want him to be doing, or try to manipulate or anything. But just, I constantly kind of hear our Lord's voice in my head, like, but what am I asking you to do? Like, are you doing what I'm asking you to do? Okay, then if you are, then let me handle him. Let me handle the situation. And there are times in marriage when, as a wife and a mother, I might not agree with everything that my husband says or does in terms of how he leads the family, or but I trust him as a whole, and I think that just honoring him and his role is better for our family than getting my own way or having my own judgment, because God doesn't give me the grace to lead the family in that way. I mean, I do lead the family in certain areas in my own ways that God calls me to, but in terms of, the head of the family and how he's meant and called to lead us, you know, it doesn't matter if I see it all the time. And I'm not saying that I don't have an opinion or that I certainly have a great husband who listens, and he has different ideas of things, but that's good. It's good that we both can engage in this, but at the end of the day, somebody has to make the decision, and I think it's right that I don't try to hold on to my own opinions.
Right.
And
what are some of the ways maybe you've experienced or have leadership in the family? How would you describe that as the mother in the family?
well, I think it's kind of an interesting. You have maybe a lot of us who have many children. You go on a hike or a walk or whatever, and you kind of plant one parent at the head to walk ahead, and the other one in the back to kind of lead from behind and make sure everyone's kind of staying on the path.
Right.
And I try to lead, and I don't know if that's the right word, but obviously there are a lot of things that I'm doing behind the scenes that the kids and my husband aren't necessarily seeing, through prayer and through just kind of organization and
just
taking care,
needs, right?
addressing all the different kids in all the different ways. Just kind of mother henning them maybe together, trying always to bring them back in as, my husband's very active and the kids are very active. I have all boys, and they're, it's kind of chaotic. They're kind of going in all different directions sometimes. And so to try to make home and a peaceful place where they can come back to. And I think that's a big role for me is to make home a space that they love to always come back and reunite. And hopefully we can do that for our kids. So, I think a lot of people think, well, it's kind of demeaning to have to clean the house or do all this stuff. I don't feel that way. I feel like it's all part of my vocation to help make this home a space that they love and where they can encounter Christ, and they feel loved and they feel peaceful and they know where to go when things happen outside of the world, that in the world where they're encountering difficulties or whatever. And of course, that's not to say that our house is always like this sanctuary of, joy. I'm certainly guilty of making it not that way sometimes, but that's what I try to do, and give them a really good example is what I try to do of, I'm going to do my best to make time to go to Mass every day, and I'm going to be praying for each one of you and your needs, because I think that's helping you. And I'm going to lead you in morning prayers and make sure you're saying your prayers. And if my husband, he goes through phases where he's really good about giving the kids a blessing before bed or before they leave. And then there are times when we're busy and he doesn't remember whatever. If I haven't seen it in a while, I'll, maybe mention it. But that's all I can do. I'm not going to nag him about like, hey, why aren't you doing this? It's just kind of remember this was a really good thing. I'd love for you to be doing that. And then I have to let it go and let him decide to do it or not. And I'm not going to control him in that, even if I think it's a good thing.
And how, we know Satan is always trying to tear apart the family. It seems like that's, in my mind, it just seems like the number one thing. The way of the world goes by way of the family and fundamental cell of society. And even like the vocation crisis, I think a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times holy families produce vocations to the priesthood and things, religious life. We desperately need priests in the country and the world. So it's just absolutely fundamentally critical. Satan's trying to tear it up, burn it to the ground. Is there, do you think about that, or your experience of protecting your family from Satan or spiritual warfare, however you describe it?
Oh, absolutely. I've been graced in the last few years, I think, especially as I've worked with the confraternity, just to find a lot of peace in the support of the church and the prayers of other mothers, that we're all striving for the same thing. We have a beautiful community in Colorado where we have a lot of families that are like-minded and really trying to raise up holy children. So we try to build friendships and relationships and put our kids in the best position in their school and in their social settings and in their sports to be surrounded by other good, holy people. And so that brings me a lot of peace, and just knowing that God wants them more than I do, that he's going to be taking care of them. But, you have to be practical as well. And, obviously prayer and sacrifice intentional for your children. I have 5 boys, and so my daily mass intention, usually I've got one for each day. So I kind of do it that way. And we do pray the rosary as a family when we're together, and otherwise we make sure that all the boys are praying it if they have to be away. Engaging in spiritual warfare. My husband and I both have done the Nineveh 90 or Exodus 90 programs to really, just expel Satan from our lives as much as we can and from our home. We also have just family practices. We'll have the house blessed. We had it officially, formally blessed and consecrated by priests, but also every year on Epiphany, redoing the house blessing. We have, a statue of Our Lady and a crucifix in our living room and some other religious art that we try to make really nice and comfortable, pleasant, but not overwhelming. So those are just some of the ways, and just kind of referring. The Christ is the center of our home, so we're constantly referring back to him. I also have a great devotion to the angels. My first 3 sons are named after the archangels, and so just encouraging and just having a relationship with your guardian angel and with the angels in your life. Saint Francis de Sales, in his introduction to the devout life, says, have a devotion to the guardian angels of all the people that you live with besides your own, and your parish and your diocese. So, I try to just be very fervent in prayer and in invoking their assistance with my kids, literally, whether they're up to bat at their baseball game or, if we have, special circumstances that are challenging for them, or just in my daily devotions, trying to just be conscious of their presence and their existence in our life, and trustful that they actually are doing what we believe they do, right? And not have that fear that, well, if I don't stand in their way, my kids are definitely going to get lost. No, I'm doing what God has asked me to do as much as I can, and I'm trusting that he is going to lead them. And I'll say one other thing about that, with relative to, kind of submitting to the authority of our husbands. When my oldest, was discerning his choice for college, I certainly had my opinions on where I wanted him to go. And, I was struggling because his discernment wasn't the same as my discernment, and his approach to it wasn't the way I wanted him to. And I was praying about it. I was really having a really rough moment of, how do I make him, God, how do I make him see that he should be doing this thing that I want him to do? And I really felt like God was telling me, like, how about if you be the first woman in his life that will trust him? How about you be the first woman in his life that's going to submit to his decision? I'm giving him the grace to process this the way I'm leading him. It's not your decision. So step back and get out of his way. Obviously, I'm still
That's
his
tough
mother.
for
I'm
women,
still
isn't it?
going to. I'm still going to. I still want to help him through that process because he's still very young. But it was such a place of peace for me too, to not have that fear anymore and to trust, like, God really is doing what he says he's going to do. He is going to take care of our children.
Yeah. And then too, I remember in seminary that one of the professors saying, you take a class on theological anthropology, study of the human person and how it relates to God and stuff. And he said that God directs man to himself from within himself. It's like, all these immaterial things follow natural laws, gravity, whatever. But he directs us to himself from within. So, we have to make our choices, right? And God's going to give us grace, give me grace to make the choice, not somebody else, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And in the moment when it needs to be done. I mean,
Yeah.
I will read stories of martyrs and be like, I could never do that. Although, like, they probably thought that too before the moment, because God didn't give them the grace when they were 3 to be a martyr when they were 37, right? He gave them the grace when they were 37.
Right.
And obviously grace is building up to that point, but that moment, that's all he promises. He doesn't give us the promise that we're going to feel good about it leading up to then, or even that we'll feel good about it in the moment, but we have the grace to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And did you always want to be a mother?
No, actually, I didn't. I grew up in a wonderful family, and I have 9 siblings and a great mom and dad. But I didn't really connect with my mom as much as my dad. My dad he was amazing. Like, there were just certain things that he could say, and I'll have them etched in my brain for my life. He would just say something, and it would mean to me that he thought I could do this thing. So he told me when I was in, I don't know, 5th grade, oh, you should play volleyball because girls get scholarships for going to, playing volleyball in college. So all of a sudden I was a volleyball player and I was going to college, when I was in 5th grade. And nobody in my family had ever been to college before. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, just a little thing that he probably never remembered that he said. Yeah. But he impacted my life so much. So all the big experiences of my life, really, I connected a lot with my dad. And my mom was always she was very joyful. She would sing all the time, and she just loved being a mother. She loved being pregnant. And it was confused. I didn't understand that. I didn't necessarily have any attraction to it. Maybe also just being a little bit more of a reserved person and having all these people around all the time was a little bit of a challenge. And anyway, she's lovely, but like I said, she's just a very different personality than me. And but I think I saw the value of what she was doing. I saw that she was very happy and content, that being a mother was an important thing. Even though I didn't necessarily desire it, but I think it gave me, so when I came to that point in my life of becoming a mother, it was very natural. And I think there's something really, really valuable about having been brought up in a big family with very little money, in a place where in Southern California, there were not very many big families, and it was just very evident. They never talked about it, but it was very evident that they were happy that's the way God wanted it, right? God didn't want them to have a lot of money. He wanted them to have a lot of kids. And they were just as happy with that. Maybe my dad would have liked a little more money, but anyway.
In Southern California too, that must have been tough, right?
Yeah, it was tough. And they made it work. And so our family is very different, but I think we were kind of proud of it. My oldest sister did a really good job of really instilling that, like, hey, we're a team and I will totally beat you up. But if anybody else tries to beat you up, like, we're no. So she was great, but it was a great sense of family. So but when I fell in love, there was no sense that I wouldn't be a mother if I got married.
Yeah.
There was no sense that I wouldn't. I mean, I really didn't even intend to try to pursue career and family ever. In fact, when I first started college and I thought, well, I probably will be a mother sometime, I tried to choose a career that I thought would work if I worked for a couple years and then took some time off with the kids and then went back to it. So I was an education major for a while and then ended up going to law school. But even at that point, I knew that when I had children, that would be my work, at least for a time. And, now I'm very happy that was an example that was given to me. And my grandmothers and everybody, I didn't really have people close in my life that were, pursuing careers or anything like that over children. So.
And how do you feel like you've grown in motherhood? Like maybe has there been something surprising, or what's it like to grow in motherhood? How's it look different 22 years in?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, in every way, I hope. You grow hopefully in humility. I think I always marvel. I don't know if other women can relate to this, but I think having 3 kids is kind of like the hump you got to get over, and then having more is just easier because you feel like you can still handle everything. When you've got 1 or 2, you can manage everything. Then you got 3 and you feel like you still should be, but it's a little bit out of control and that's not comfortable. I mean, the 4th one, you're like, yes, random person at the grocery store, I do need help. Yes, you may carry my basket or whatever, yes, I'm clearly overwhelmed. Thank you. So I think you grow in a little bit of humility. I think a lot of people are afraid of teenagers, and I can understand that. But for me, it's just been a joy to see my boys growing and becoming young men and seeing their personalities develop, and just, again, learning to try to respect them as young men and see where they're going, how they're going to respond to God living their lives, and see where God's going to call them. I think handing them over to God every day and growing in my prayer life, which is easier as your kids get a little bit bigger and you don't have, I remember when I would have little kids and I would try to develop a really good prayer routine so that I could handle the day, right? And inevitably, they would wake up as early as, it didn't matter what time I wanted to wake up in the morning. They could be getting up at 7 every single day consistently, but then I decide to get up at 6:30. The day that I do that, they all decide they have to wake up at 6:30. There's some sixth sense that kids have.
You got to slowly stay in bed, slowly pull the prayer book.
I know, right? No, it did not work. I tell you what, I don't know. There was something going on, but so it was hard when they were little. They needed a lot as soon as they woke up, and so it was harder to start the day with prayer. Or you're so tired at the end of the day, it's hard. So you try to get prayers in as you can, but mostly they're just kind of on the fly or whatever. But so now, as they're all in school, I can really devote a lot more time to prayer and having a routine of prayer and going to mass, and so that's been great. But also just growing in my unity with my husband in a lot of ways, and just trying to understand marriage more, being an example hopefully to them for that.
I was wondering, I think about this sometime in driving. It's like, because you might have your phone connected, you're listening to a podcast or music or something like that. So confess, very distracted driving at times. But as you drive a lot, you learn like what to pay attention to. Like what is the danger zones that, hey, I gotta, when I can kind of look at something else for briefly. But I was wondering with the parents too. It seemed like some of the parents I know have big families and they might have a surprise young one. It's like they just seem so relaxed, and they have this way of like, still doing their life kind of thing, but they know when to step in. They know what's a big deal, what's not a big deal. It's
My
like,
husband's a lot better than that, and at that than I am. I kind of try to, I kind of panic a little bit more if things aren't going the way I think they ought to. But again, yeah, I think you're right though. It's just more experience. You've kind of seen a little bit more how things go and where things lead,
right.
or how again, just also. I think there's a sense maybe growing in that humility that I was just talking about, just having that sense of like, I cannot do this. I've actually, in our confraternity, we went through a series on St. John the Baptist over a period of a year where we were kind of analyzing all the different, or discussing all the different passages that relate to St. John the Baptist. And for me, he's an immensely powerful patron for mothers, which is really funny. I mean, when you think about like his just appearance, and he's just not very attractive for mothers. He doesn't seem to be a very motherly type of person. He's a little bit, right?
He's not effeminate.
Right.
He's out in the desert, canvas hair eating locusts.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's kind of hard to make the connection. But what was his message? What was his role? It was to prepare the way of the Lord.
Yeah.
That's your job as a mother. That's it. That is your job. Prepare the way of the Lord. Guess what? You're not the Messiah. And you're not even going to see this out to the end. You're not going to be able to hold your kid's hand. Not only, they're going to let go at some point while they're young, but you're going to let go at some point in their lifetime, and they're going to have to keep going, and they're going to have to finish God willing. Obviously, nobody wants to lose a child early in life, but that's the ideal, is that we let go. We don't hold on to them. And you don't try to be their Messiah. You can't be. You're not. It's all about Christ. It's not about me. So for me, my job is to prepare the way and do the best I can to. I live in the mountains, so hiking is a big image for me. So I'm taking them, and when they're really little, you're going to be carrying them on the path, and you're doing everything you can to protect them. And it's a super sweet experience. You're holding them, having a beautiful hike. And then they get to be toddlers and they want to get down and run, and it's exhausting, and you're trying to pick them up because they can't get over all the rocks, and they can't. So you pick them up over the rocks, and you're helping them. You're doing everything you can to keep them on this path and to keep them away from the edge. And then they get to adolescence and teenagers, and they're running. They're faster than you. Yeah. You're not going to catch up, but you're going to try still. You're going to make the path very appealing so that even if they do fall off the path, you want it to be a peaceful, beautiful place to come home to come back to the faith, come back to on the path, So, and that's even as you are a grandmother and you see your children, having their own families, you're constantly trying to be that light, and you're constantly continuing in their lives to take away any roadblocks. If you can clear the path of any extra, little cactus or little rocks or anything that they might stumble on that you have the power to take away, take it away. Continue to make that path beautiful and inviting. But guess what? Your adult children, you're not going to pick them up and put them back on the path. Only God can do that. So see your role, see who you are in that light, and continue until God calls you home. Just be that St. John the Baptist, the voice crying out in the wilderness, and do the best you can.
I remember years ago we interviewed Dr. Meg Meeker. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I have heard of her.
Yeah, she talked about, I think she was a doctor, a pediatrician or something, but she talked about, that closeness the mother has, and when the kids are young, and at some point she really had to and it was difficult for her to let the husband in to play his role in a more pronounced way when they're hitting the teenage years and stuff like that. I've heard some people they describe it as like the man has a special role to introduce them to the world,
Mm-hmm.
and give the guidance, like your
Yeah.
father did, maybe with the
Mm-hmm.
education and sports and stuff. But this one guy, I remember, he had like over 10 kids, I think, and he was at the network. I think he was part of a show or something. But he said, I asked him, I said, well, how are the teenage years, with all these kids? And he said, I love it. He said, I finally feel like I'm really having a very direct impact on their
Oh,
life.
sure.
Because he was starting to drive some of them to colleges, to look at colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And he was loving that. But is that a hard thing? Let your husband in, or your...
For me, no. I think every family has a different dynamic, but partly because I have all boys, and my husband's very nurturing and affectionate, and so he's always enjoyed being part of the younger years as well. And now he really is involved with them in their sports and taking them places. And my oldest son works with him. But actually, the oldest 2, 3 maybe at times work with him because he has that kind of job that can allow for that. But he's always had a really direct influence. And I love that. I am so, my husband and I are pretty much polar opposites in a lot of ways. So you see, that's difficult sometimes, but you see the virtue in the other person that that you lack, and so I am so grateful that God led me to marry someone that I really admire and that I want my boys to grow up to be like in their unique way. So I am grateful to have his influence. My father was not like that. He did not really enjoy or want to engage. Like babies and little people were kind of my mom's deal, and he was very happy to not engage too much. But then he did really, once they were active enough to really do stuff with him, play sports or
I remember Jason Everett said something I thought was so funny. He said, we're all, said so many young people, you're looking to find this compatible person, And he said, let me just break the news to you. You're not compatible. He said early on in their marriage, he didn't understand, they'd make up the bed or whatever and have these nice decorative throw pillows. And then at night, you come in, you put the throw pillows, maybe throw them to the floor. So why are we going through this
every day?
He said, we couldn't agree on throw pillows, let alone the rest of them.
Right.
And, so I thought that was kind of funny.
It is funny.
And like the greatness of marriage, again, I know we've talked about this, but what do you see? Because we say God is love. We say marriage is a sacrament. It's an image of Christ's love for the church. He's the bridegroom. The church is the bride. So sacraments, God's present in the sacraments. And I think John Paul II spoke of marriage as like bringing down in a concrete way, the very Trinitarian love, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, this divine family, Is there glimpses of that you say, you have a sense of the presence of God?
Oh, beyond doubt. It is so palpable sometimes where you have this little tiny person who's done something for you, and you can kind of see a reflection of like, okay, so it's kind of like, I know my prayers are weak, but you look at it the same way that so for example, like your toddler might, make you breakfast or something like that, and it's a total disaster because they don't know what they're doing, right? I mean, they made a mess, and it actually doesn't taste very good most of the time, right? But you love it. Yes, you love it, and you appreciate so much the effort, and so you can see like your offerings to God in that same light. Sometimes I'll look at the work that I'm doing or the volunteering or the prayers or whatever. I'm like, they're so weak. They're so like that little messed up breakfast. But because I'm weak, but you actually love what I've just done, and if I've given it to you in the right spirit, because I've done it out of love, and I've done it despite my weakness, I've still been faithful to offer that to you. And then conversely, like you look at your children and the love you have for them, and you can't quantify it, you can't explain it, and you just have sometimes this very humbling and overpowering sense of God showing you how much he loves you, because obviously his is infinitely greater,
Right.
but in respect of what it is, my love for my child is such a reflection of his love for
Right.
me, and of course for my child as
Yeah.
well. I really get overwhelmed with that feeling sometimes of just like, wow, this is parenthood. And then you asked how I've grown in my motherhood. I mean, it comes more and more often, maybe because I have a little bit more time to reflect now that the kids are a little bit, not in my every moment all the time. But just experiencing that love. And really trying to understand how God's using the family to show us what he means by how much he loves us, and what he would do for us.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I know Pope Benedict, and I'm sure John Paul talked about this aspect of evangelization that the family does in their witness, and I've been convicted of that too, because it's like that's still one of our brothers. We were talking about the Brady Bunch, and there was some kind of, they were rebuilding like the Brady home, from the television show, and they brought back the actors, and I'm like thinking, what is our fascination with this? Because at one level, it's such a kind of crazy, silly thing, and the brother said because it's about a family, it was like. And as a kid, I never appreciated that. But, there's just this draw that I think we all have a hunger for the things you're talking about. And like, it still even speaks to this modern secular world that, that's what I'm made for. I'm made to be in communion with one another. I'm made to love. I'm made to be loved, to be known. And that is happening especially in the family. And people see that. And I think very secular people can see that in some Christian families, because we're gifted and we're supposed to, and oftentimes we are, have great witnesses of family life. And I think the secular person say, I want that. Just on a natural level, I hunger for that.
I've tried to be cognizant of that when I have taken my family out, as we go to the grocery store or whatever. I try to make sure that I don't allow my, stress or my struggles to, show to the broader world. Because I do think that it's important that you are a witness, especially if you have a unique family, like a family of all boys. People just notice. And so you have to be a witness, even physically, in the way you present your life and your family. Now, I'm not saying like you're going to pretend to be somebody else when you're out in public, but make an extra effort to be joyful, and make an extra effort to make sure everybody is, dressed nicely. Or, I'm not saying dress up to go to the grocery store, but present yourself like you want to be a good witness to the world. Yeah. So make your family attractive, try to make your home attractive, so that when they bring their friends over, they also feel that sense of peace in your home, or that sense of joy, or like, this is a great sanctuary. They're not your kids' friends aren't going to say that. They're not going to notice it in a real obvious way, but you want them to like being around in a space like that. And I say prayers for my kids' friends when they come over, or when we're at baseball or whatever. Sometimes it's funny, we have such a crazy schedule on the weekends for sports that sometimes we end up going like the earliest mass we can find in Denver and then going straight to the ball fields or whatever on a Sunday. And I struggle with that because I feel like, like I'm, that most people here aren't going to church. They're not really paying any attention to God. And so it's kind of funny when we show up and we have our mass clothes on or whatever. But, I think it's kind of a witness in a way. You know what I mean? You're not, and why are you wearing a dress to the baseball game, and you're like, we just got a mass or whatever. And it gives you the opportunity. I mean, and I've struggled with it a little bit, but I do at the moment feel like maybe God's giving me that role to just be there to pray for all these people and to be a good witness to, like how to keep the Lord's Day. And I don't know.
Yeah.
See how it goes.
And do you have like some heroes or particular saints that have been inspiring to you?
Well, I would say St. John the Baptist for sure over the last, just every single one of the passages in the Bible that relates to St. John the Baptist is very powerful for mothers. So I really encourage moms to really study St. John the Baptist in light of motherhood.
I've never heard that.
It's so fascinating and powerful. One of the, I could go through the whole list, but I'll spare you right now. So, but just do that. Go through. There aren't that many in there that describe him, but
give us one that you really particularly love.
Well, when you have Herod is hearing all these things about Jesus, and he's saying, wait, is that John? I thought I beheaded John. That can't be John. So who is that, right? Yeah. And I think to me, that's an indication of like how much the mother is supposed to be Christ-like, how much she's supposed to resemble him. There's almost this confusion of like, was that Jesus? Was that you? Or like, who is that? But you got to be that person who's as close to Christ as you can be, so that when he comes, they recognize him, right? You can't, if you're living your own life and your own self or whatever, and then you can't really expect them to know Christ when he enters their life if you're not, right? Yeah. So anyway, that was just another one. St. Thomas More, as a lawyer, one of my great favorites, but he was also an incredible family man. He led his family with such gentleness and grace and kindness. He was actually way before his time in terms of, educating his daughters and in a graceful and an appropriate, but also like his daughter Margaret was one of the greatest female scholars in all of Europe at the time, and of course his faithfulness in the tumult of the time, his humility he never condemned Henry VIII. He was able to see himself and his own role and be faithful to God, but not have to worry too much about everybody else and how wrong they were. He continued to pray all throughout his life that we would all meet in heaven, So even this man, this king who had betrayed him and ultimately had him executed and totally, you can argue that if Henry VIII had stayed Catholic, that the Protestant Reformation would not have had any success, really, because England it was a real power and would have been able to support the other Catholic, the Pope and everybody. But because he also rebelled, the Protestant Reformation was able to take root and really. But St. Thomas More was constantly praying for him, for Henry VIII, and that he would be, even to the end, he was praying that Henry VIII would get good counsel. He didn't he didn't presume to make judgments on his king. He didn't presume. I mean, he had a discernment that this was wrong and this was right, and he had to stay faithful to the truth of the Catholic faith. But he didn't have that condemning sense that, well, I'm right and you guys are all wrong. And I think there's way too much of that in the world and in the church. And so I really, his humility, he has a great prayer of humility that I think one of the EWTN programs had put out there at one point, of him praying for, let me have a sense of humor. Let me have a sense of, not be too troubled at the sight of sin, because it was all around him everywhere, and let me not be too concerned with this bothersome thing I call myself, which is that humility. So obviously Our Lady of Sorrows is a great patroness. I feel like Our Lady of Sorrows is really on the move right now. You're hearing a lot more about her in different areas, at least in my world. That she's a very powerful patroness right now. I feel like she had a plan for me. I was never attracted to Our Lady of Sorrows throughout my whole life. And when I was in college, I had this friend that she's an old lady. She's probably in her 80s. And, I would go to daily mass and we would pray the rosary together. And she was always trying to give me these Our Sorrowful Mother cards or whatever. And, with the promises or whatever. And I'm like, I don't really like that image, right, of her sorrows. For some reason, it just was never attractive to me.
I think as a young person.
And as a mother, honestly, when I first joined the confraternity, I was like, I wonder why Our Lady of Sorrows. How interesting. Why don't we focus on the joys of Mary or like the joys of motherhood? Why are we focusing on the sorrows? And then my youngest son was born on her feast day. I remember my brother's wife was due with a baby within a couple days, and she was actually due on the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, and I was like, great, I hope you go on time. You can have it, because I'd rather have the Feast of the Holy Cross or whatever. As my son came on her feast day, and then to have the confraternity becomes such a big part of my life, and how her sorrows is the principal patroness, and just to kind of develop a devotion and pray the Chaplet of the Seven Sorrows more regularly, and meditate on those mysteries as well. It's been really beautiful. Saint Therese was one of my early patrons. I think she kind of I also feel like she kind of grabbed onto me as when I was very young. I was just very interested in her, and she and I have had this interesting relationship of like I always love her and revere her, but she's very different than Mother. I don't see motherhood really in her, and so I've had less of a devotion to her in these years, but I'm waiting to see kind of what she has planned for our future together. I think in a certain sense of like as my motherhood grows and develops, and one thing being that Saint Zélie Martin, her mother, we know that she participated with the Christian Mothers in the very early development. We don't know if she was actually a member or not, but so that'll be interesting to continue that research and try to help figure that out, and maybe form some devotion to her, who was, she'd be a great patron for Christian Mothers anyway, having had, I don't know, several of her children are canonized or beatified, or at least, revered in holiness. Saint Bernard, his mother, had almost all of Saint Bernard's brothers were either canonized or beatified. And her husband, she herself was beatified, I believe, and her husband is a venerable. So that's a beautiful story. And she had 5 sons, one daughter as well. But so that was a really neat connection for me. So yeah. And then of course the angels, guardian angels. I mean, every mother should have devotion to the angels. I mean, I have moments where I'm like, I absolutely know that a guardian angel just plucked my child from that dangerous situation or from, whatever. And I can almost see him.
And why do you think, so you said you see like a growth in devotion to Our Lady of Sorrows. Why do you think that is today?
I really don't know, but they're just, in my world at least, there seems to be something in the air where you're just kind of, attracted to some devotion or some spirituality or some movement in the church, and you find out that she's behind that or whatever it is. I believe, I don't know that much about it, but I believe that Our Lady of Cabejo, when she appeared in Africa, requested that we would start praying the Chaplet of the Seven Sorrows.
That sounds familiar.
And so it's interesting, and I maybe it's because of the that first sort of sorrow that is the prophecy of Simeon, right? And it's interesting because you have, it's also one of the joyful mysteries of the Rosary, right? You have the joy of Our Lady and the sorrow of, the presentation and the prophecy of Simeon. And so I've kind of always been like, well, I guess that was just like the icebreaker, and then the real sorrows start, like the next one's like, what is this this prophecy? Okay, he says a sword will pierce your heart. So that's kind of it. But if you really meditate on it, he's literally telling this brand new mother that he is, that he's recognizing the Messiah. He's set for the fall and for the rising of so many in Israel. Well, when she's looking at her child, she knows the suffering that he's going to go through. And he's telling her right there that most people are going to reject him, actually. This isn't all going to have a happy ending in a certain sense, right? So, and I think that's kind of really playing out in our world right now. I mean, it always has. I mean, you look at history, it's always been crazy. I'm reading The City of God by St. Augustine right now. Oh my goodness. I mean, the stuff that he describes in there, you're like, not even the most depraved people in our world right now would do these things. But so it's always been like that, but it's built on a rejection of Christ now. And not just never having known him.
Right.
It's post-Christian. It's not, it is the fruition of that sword of sorrow where people have, you can argue whether they've actually seen who he is or not, but he's been presented to them in some form or other. Yeah. And they've chosen to reject him, not just go along with what they always did because he wasn't even a part of it, right? But they're looking at him and they're rejecting him, so...
And I obviously today too, it's like our secular culture, the people that suffer first, I think in most, are kind of the children, I think women, and so our youth are really hurting today. I mean, all the indicators, anxiety, depression, suicide, all these things are, going up, and so you could see how mothers would be drawn to a devotion that they see Our Lady knows that pain and that suffering, and I think we mentioned before too, just or maybe it was with Father Joseph Tuscan, but just her role at the cross, as co-redemptrix of suffering with Christ, that I think is especially prophesied with Simeon. That she suffers with Christ and is the mediatrix of all graces. I remember I was having a conversion experience when I learned that title, that all these graces pass through her heart. Her heart is a place of refuge for us. It's like, I better have a devotion to Our Lady. But too, that her suffering with Christ, that she stands at the foot of the cross, to me that just wipes away any kind of like sentimental piety that we can project on Our Lady. You know, the birds bring her food every morning or something.
Right.
I mean, she's at the foot of the cross. Who cares?
Right.
All this others, she sees her son crucified.
Yeah.
And then he gives her to us when he's hanging on the cross. You know, woman, behold your son, behold your mother, to John. You know, that is so huge. I mean, that's hit me the last 5 years. That is so astounding. At the moment he's redeeming us, he gives us Mary to be our mother. That she has this role to play. It's a theological place there. That there's a theological meaning to that motherhood that she has, that she's the mother of us in the order of grace, our spiritual mother, and has this role in our redemption. And because he dies 2 sentences later. That's the third to the last thing he says before he dies.
Right, exactly.
And so we say all this because mothers have a great role to play. They're a special image of Mary, a special image of the church as bride, as mother. And we need that image. We need that witness in the church to inspire us all, holiness. And we'll just close now. Can you just give us one more gem? I'm fascinated with John the Baptist because the church exalts him. I mean, he is an Advent. He's one of the central figures. And every year you got to preach a lot about him. And early on I'd wonder, okay, what is the big deal about John? And you go all over the place and it's like there's churches all over dedicated to him.
Right. Well, in the early church, I mean, he was the greatest born among women, right?
Yeah.
He was the greatest of all saints. Until, you know, probably the late, you know, first millennium. It was he for hundreds and hundreds of years. He was revered after Mary as the greatest saint. And then I think we do have this image in our culture of him as this weirdo. I mean, like if you ever see this, the show The Chosen, they call him Crazy John.
I know,
right?
I don't like that character.
It's not a good characterization of him, and you know you can understand why a lot of the imagery that you would develop based on the scriptures is kind of obscure and strange. His behavior was strange, but having him, you know. Let's take his perspective on marriage, right? Like he was very bold to proclaim in the face of the world what marriage is.
He was calling out
in
Herod,
his whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, and he put his life on the line. He sacrificed himself, and at the central issue there was his call to repentance and to living the truth of marriage. So I think that's another meditation that we could go really deep with on him and his relationship to the family and to marriage and to wives. Like how am I living marriage in a Christ-like way, and how am I responding to that call of constant repentance and constant grace?
That's the essence, I think, of holiness. Is that part of that conversion? And that is a missing message we don't hear strongly today, that call to, I mean, you could summarize the gospel by saying, you know, the kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. You know, so have faith and turn from your sin. And he's an extraordinary model of that. So.
Yes.
Well, Colleen, thank you so much for giving us so much time, and keep up the good work. And
thank you.
It's much needed today.